All right, well, it's 6:31 and we've got most people, well, people have stopped trickling in, so maybe they'll join later. Anyways, let's get this thing started. So, welcome everyone. My name is Ned Bowman. I am an outreach coordinator and project biologist with Great Basin Bird Observatory. Tonight's program is called 600 Miles of What? And we're going to share some iconic Nevada experiences. That is a place of vastness and starkness, its beauty often subtle, and not every eye immediately appreciates it. For some who call this home, the solitude speaks to us. Yet, despite this apparent bleakness, once you get out of the car and on the ground, your senses can be easily overwhelmed. Nevada's main hubs of Vegas and Reno are nearly 600 miles apart, and many residents have made the drive and flight and are quite familiar with it. While it does span the length of the state, it leaves out many habitat features. So I would argue that the casual observer of US Highway 95 does not know Nevada. So I would like to introduce you. Tonight, longtime GBBO employee Bobby Wilcox is going to share some of his experiences surveying birds in Nevada. He will be sharing photos of Nevada's landscapes, stories of his experiences there, and recordings of his soundscapes. So just before I bring Bobby on here, I just want to mention how we'll do questions throughout tonight's program. If you guys do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. We are going to hold those until the end of the program, at which point I'll go through and read through the questions. And folks can also use the raise hand feature, and I will call on you. And we actually have a hand up right now. So let me see here. Got Rocio Graff with a hand up. Was there something you had in mind?
No, I actually was trying to figure out, you couldn't hear me and I was waving at you right when he started, so I wasn't really getting it, but now I know not to wave at you unless I have a question.
Okay, perfect.
I'll lower it right now.
All right, good. So, without further ado, here is Bobby.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. As Ned said, I'm Bobby Wilcox, longtime GBBO stalwart field biologist and surveyor. And yeah, I mean, he gave a really good introduction about, very eloquent, much more eloquent than mine is going to be about some of the features and landscapes of Nevada. So, what I'm gonna do here is it's gonna be kind of bouncing around a little bit. We're gonna talk about some of Nevada's quirks. We're gonna look at some different locations and habitats by county throughout the state. And we're going to talk about some of the birds, mammals, different things you can see there. And then I'm going to try to talk about a few sort of field biology specific experiences just to give people kind of an idea of what we do in the field and what it's like to be a bird surveyor in Nevada, because it's a pretty interesting place to spend time and do bird surveys. So let me get my thing here sorted and play. So I trust now that Ned will come in and tell me if anything looks wrong, and I'm going to assume it looks right. So here we go. Yeah, 600 miles of what? Sounds and scenes of Nevada. Like he said, it's a very diverse state, but you'd be forgiven if you drove through without really appreciating or noticing the diversity that exists in Nevada. So we're going to come back to this. I think I have this slide in here later, but this is the Pine Nut Mountains, and it's just outside of Reno to the east. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So first thing to know is that Nevada is very similar to some of the states that border it, but it's quite different in many ways too. As you can see by these couple interesting examples here, people in Utah is a lot more straight-laced. Nevada has some evil tendencies, perhaps, that they like to separate themselves. So Utah makes very clear that this side is Utah, And this side with the big casino is Nevada. And then on the other side, we've got California. And California also likes to make very clear, this is California with our brand new fancy highway, big fine for littering. And then right on the other side of the road, here we are in Nevada. And it's just a big gravel road and bullet holes in the signs. And you know very quickly when you hit the state line. So just some kind of fun Nevada anecdotes. Another interesting feature of Nevada is weird. I don't even know if this is a ghost town. It's this place is a place that we pass often on the road on Interstate 80 in between Lovelock and Winnemucca in the middle of the state, and it's just a sign near a big truck stop, and you know there's no buildings, no nothing, but apparently pucker brush either used to be there or will be there someday in the future, but you know, somebody thinks it's there. Maybe it's underground. Nobody knows. So from there, like let's sort of move into some more specifics. So just to get an overview here, we've got our satellite map of Nevada, and you know you can see Vegas, Reno, our major hubs, and then kind of a lot of quote nothing in between. But there's a lot of fascinating stuff in here. And I mean, you can see just from the map. I mean, the sort of the basin range geology of Nevada with these vast basins, low-lying basins in between the mountain ranges, which are green because they're more vegetated, especially in this area. But that sort of exists all throughout Nevada. This area is the Owyhee Desert, so it's a little bit less basin and rangy. So we're going to start in the far south here in Clark County, the home of Las Vegas, and we're just going to sort of do a loop of the state. So I'm going to come back to this map a few times, but it's worth kind of paying attention to it and remembering where some of the counties are, because I'm going to go by county and just sort of discuss some interesting spots that maybe people it's hard to know who is watching these things and who is from Nevada or who has never seen Nevada before. But I'm gonna hopefully turn some people on to visit Nevada and maybe show some people some places that they might have never thought existed, but that they would like to go. So starting in Clark County, we've got the Warm Springs Natural Area, which is a cool little spot. It's just to the northeast of Vegas, and as the name indicates, there's some warm springs, some warm creeks flowing through. There's a number of interesting endangered small fish that live in the streams, but it's also an interesting place for some sort of Mojave riparian habitat, and it's one of the few areas in Nevada where you can find this habitat with these sort of mesquite bosques and quail bush and different things like this along this river corridor. A lot of ash in here, so some really interesting birds. We're going to play a recording here that's got a number of species in it, and this is will give you an idea of what it's like to be a bird surveyor and how many species we have to listen to and try to pick out as we're doing a survey. So let's play it here. So I don't know how in tune people are to their bird vocalizations, but I heard about 6 species in there. The main species was a Bell's vireo, this is one of the few places in Nevada where it's easy to see Bell's vireo. There's a verdin in there, Buick strand, phainopepla. What else? There was something else. Oh, Abert's towhee at the end, also another area where one of the few areas in Nevada where you can see Abert's towhee. So this is a cool spot, definitely worth checking out. Ash Meadows, which is to the northwest of Vegas, is another similar cool that's worth paying a visit to. And another interesting anecdote, a couple years back, I found the second state record of dusky-capped flycatcher at this spot, Warm Springs. So always worth keeping an ear out for that one. So we're actually going to move a little bit south here. So this is called Potosi Mountain, and it's at the very south end of the Spring Mountains, which is a kind of island in the sky sort of mountain range, Sky Island mountain range in just to the west of Vegas. And this is a really cool area, kind of an interesting place where the Mojave Desert meets some juniper forest, really nice Mojave Desert with Joshua trees, lots of cholla, lots of cool cacti, just a really nice place. And one of the very few places in Nevada where you can find rufous crowned sparrows. So cool place to go to look for that bird, and really cool geology too. So checking the map again, we're going to move north into, so we were kind of down in this area and this area. You're seeing the cursor there, and we're going to move north up into Lincoln County. So kind of somewhere in the middle of Lincoln County to the west of the town of Caliente, there's this large Joshua tree forest with really nice, big, pristine Joshua trees, big enough that like red tails are building their nests in them. And this is it's a really cool place. One of the few places that I think probably about the northernmost place in the state that you can find a Bendire's thrasher, which is what we're looking at here. There's also cactus wrens there, Scott's orioles. It's a really neat habitat. And as you can see in this photo, there's a power line road, which is a really nice road. It's really easy to access. You can do it in a four-door sedan. You don't need any fancy four-wheel drive or anything. This cholla here has a Bendire's thrasher's nest that actually I believe Ned and one of our other long-term field technicians, Mark Dorisfield, found a couple years back. So we're going to play a little Bendire's thrasher here. So yeah, the kind of a classic. This is probably I think it's the only thrasher outside of sage thrasher that you would find in this habitat. But it's a very classic Bendire's thrasher song, very kind of little scratchy and burry, and they don't do many imitations. So the only other bird in this area you might get confused with is a mockingbird, but their song sounds quite a bit different. But yeah, cool place to go to. And definitely should check it out. This is another really interesting spot that when you do the NBC, the Nevada bird count long enough, which is one of the main projects of GBO, you feel like you get to see everything in Nevada, but you still never get close. But this is a really cool area that I got to go to a couple of years ago that never knew existed. It's called the Fang Ridge, which is this whole ridge here in the Reveille range, I believe it's pronounced, in Nye County. So this is a little bit northwest of our last spot. And this whole formation is an old dike from a large volcanic caldera. And it's just a really spectacular place. And so it's a really great place amongst many in Nevada to see black-throated sparrow, which is the song we're going to hear here. And there's some western meadowlark in the background, which are the two birds pictured there. I think we get the idea. So we're moving a little bit further to the north now into White Pine County, which is the home of one of the few sort of major landmarks in Nevada that people might know of, the Great Basin National Park. It's on the very edge of the state, the border with Utah. But what we're looking at here is a small, kind of lesser known mountain range called the Fortification Range. And it runs from, as they all do, from north to south. And in the background here is a really cool place called the Grafton Wilderness. And it's a larger mountain range. And this area, as we can see here, this is a gray vireo. So this is a really good place. This whole area is a really good place to see gray vireo. Gray vireo distribution in Nevada that I don't totally understand, and I don't know if anybody totally does, but they tend to, in my experience, tend to be in these sort of areas with these relatively short junipers, relatively sparsely distributed, but they're really common here. We'll listen to a vocalization real quick. Yeah, so classic gray vireo. The speed is really what you're sort of keying into on that one versus the plumbeous vireo, which is usually in a slightly different habitat with bigger pinyon and junipers. But either way, the gray vireo is usually noticeably faster in its song than the plumbeous vireo, and obviously if you see them, they're quite different. But so another interesting thing about this area is it's had some really great mammal sightings in here. There's a lot of elk. There's a baby elk from this general area, and elk shed hunting is big around this area. Probably actual elk hunting too. I'm not a hunter, so I don't know. But yeah, you very commonly see elk in this general area, northern White Pine County, and strangely, porcupine. This is my first ever porcupine doing a bird survey. I was just walking back to the car and heard a sort of scuffling. It was out in the middle of sagebrush with very sparse junipers, and saw a mammal and went over to the tree, and here was this guy just trying to escape from me. And yeah, it was a really, really incredible sighting. It's, not exactly something you can recreate, but at least it's worth knowing there are porcupines in White Pine County. So they're out there. Okay. This is a place that if anybody who's familiar with Nevada might know and possibly know well, the Ruby Mountains, Lamoille, however you want to say it, Canyon is kind of the main route up into the Ruby Mountains. It's one of the more spectacular places in Nevada. If you want to go to a place if you want to get out of Nevada and go to a place that doesn't look like anything else in Nevada, the Rubies is the place to go. Has a very alpine, like actual Alps kind of feel. Just very striking knife-edged mountains and alpine barrows that don't really breed in very many other places in Nevada. You can find up here, and of course the famous Himalayan snowcock. But apparently it burned a couple years ago, some of this area, so it may not be quite as pristine, but I'm sure there's still a lot of wonderful spots to visit in this area. And then on the other side, the east side of the range, there's a really amazing wetland complex that's worth going to. Trumpeter swans breed there, and lots of neat stuff. So this is an area that I suspect maybe some people don't know about. River area in the Jarbidge. This is going to be north. The next time we'll look at a map, I'll point it out, but north of the Ruby Mountains, kind of in the very upper kind of northeast corner of the state, right near the border of Idaho. And this is a really neat area. The access is a little difficult, but there's some nice places to camp up here and a nice trail system. This trail system is from it's called the Marys River Trailhead, I think, and just some really spectacular mountains and mix of habitats. You get sort of montane meadows, you get these stands of the name is escaping me. I'll come back to that, but huge aspen stands. Just a really, and even into pine forest. I mean, this photo I like because you can see all these different sort of mosaic of habitats existing in this one place. And it's just a really cool place, and definitely really worth visiting if you can make it up there. And the other interesting thing is this has the highest density of Lewis's woodpeckers I've ever seen anywhere. In the area within maybe a 500 meters of the campsite that we stayed at, there were I don't know, probably 20 of them. It was amazing. So just if you want to go somewhere in the state to see Lewis's woodpeckers, this is the place. Mountain mahogany. That's the thing I was trying to remember on this one. Sorry about that. Okay, so that actually, before we move on, Mary's River was right up in this area. You can see my cursor. Actually, it's one of these two, this general area, and this is the Ruby Mountains. So we're in Elko County here, and now we're going to move over to Humboldt County, which has a lot of really cool stuff. So first and foremost, this is maybe my favorite place in the entire state, the Santa Rosa Range. And this photo is taken in the sort of montane meadow above the Lock Creek campground, which is a pretty popular campground. It's quite accessible. And it's highly recommended to pay a visit there. Just spectacular habitat, gorgeous. I mean, you can see here, it's wildflowers. It's just nothing like it. I've never seen such amazing wildflowers, and the mosaic of different habitats, these massive aspen stand, a little bit of pine forest. It's a really, really gorgeous place, and some decent trails. It's definitely, and this is, I think this is called Granite Peak, and you can I think there's a road that goes fairly far up there, but even just hiking right around the campground is spectacular and worth spending a whole week. This is kind of a panorama of the same area. So this will be that same mountain here, and then this massive aspen stand down here. Campground is over here, and then just sort of off in the distance looking to the north. And so here's, we're going to play a recording with some of the kind of iconic birds from this area. This is a cool area where Swainson's thrushes breed. So that's pretty neat. There's not a ton of places in Nevada where Swainson's thrushes breed, but they're very common in this area. Fox sparrows, Audubon's warblers. So we'll have a listen here. So yeah, that's kind of a classic soundscape from a montane riparian area in Nevada. Swainson's thrush, sometimes it's hermit thrush, depending on where you are. Fox sparrows, McGillivray's warblers, dusky flycatchers. So they're a very, very common suite of species, but something you would hear a lot of if you were in an area like this with aspen stands sort of bordering the sagebrush or montane shrubland kind of steppe areas. Yeah, definitely a really neat place. Moving on a little bit further to the west, we get to Catnip Reservoir, which is in Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge. And if you're a Nevadan, you may very well have been here. I think it's kind of a well-known place, but it's definitely a really neat place worth visiting. The Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge has preserved some really spectacular sagebrush steppe, and the Catnip Reservoir is just a cool sort of the water just brings in a lot of birds. So it's a little wetland lake complex. I think the lake was built, Ned will have to correct me on this at the end, but I think it was dammed up and built to breed Lahontan cutthroat trout, if I'm not mistaken, back in the day. And then they bred enough of them, and now you can just fish there. But it's a really cool spot with a lot of interesting birds. Beautiful wildflowers. Oh, here's a recording. I forgot I had this one. Kind of cool. And eared grebes. I don't know if the eared grebes actually breed up there, but there are quite a few of them up there, and it's just an interesting bird to hear vocalizing, and some marsh wrens and coots in the background there. Quite a few eared grebes up there. So it's a neat place to see them. And moving on, so there's the eared grebe. Lots of yellow-headed blackbirds there, Virginia rails, and interestingly, it's, as far as I know, one of the few places in the state where sandhill cranes breed. So there's apparently a fairly regular pair that breeds there. We were there last year, and there was a pair with a young one that were pretty obvious and easy to see, making a lot of noise and trying to scare us away from their juvenile. So it's a really cool place. And in the evenings and mornings, hundreds of common nighthawks come through and skim the lake for insects. So it's quite a spectacle. So we'll play another vocalization here. I think this one is featuring our yellow-headed blackbird. So yeah, just Yellowhead Blackbird is always one of my favorite songs, and apparently interesting bit of information that when they sing their song, they always turn their head to the left. So I don't know, you can research that yourself and look it up, but research says that it's true. So just an interesting little anecdote there. This is another sort of Nevada oddity that just appears along the road somewhere up in the Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge. It's near Catnip Reservoir. I can't remember where it is, so this is this is like the homework for people who want to go explore Nevada. Go find Shark Rock and take a picture and send it to me. I'll give you my email at the end, but it's out there lurking. So. So we're still in Humboldt County, and we're down south of the Sheldon Wildlife Refuge and the Catnip Reservoir. So this is the Pine Forest Range, and what we're looking at here is in a place called Leonard Creek Ranch, where the Nevada Bird Count has done a lot of surveys in the last couple of years. And this is actually private access, but very similar habitat on the other side of the mountain range, the Pine Forest Range. But again, this is a really cool area with really sort of very pristine montane meadows and shrublands, and then these beautiful riparian aspen and willow corridors going up into all these little canyons. This is all mountain mahogany up here. Just a really, really neat mix of habitats, beautiful rock formations. And out here in the sagebrush, you get a lot of vesper sparrows, brewer sparrows, sage thrashers, western meadowlarks. We're going to listen to a little bit of that soundscape here. Vesper sparrow, meadowlark. So there you have it. That's a pretty classic sagebrush soundscape. It varies different heights of sagebrush. You get things, but this is sort of medium height sagebrush. This is a pretty classic soundscape for that kind of area. The Vesper sparrows, brewer sparrows, western meadowlarks. You notice that there's usually not a ton of species, but that can be a of this sort of habitat. Usually in the riparian areas, you're having to sift through a lot more birds, but there can also be a lot of birds singing at once. So it still can be difficult to do survey in these areas. Vesper sparrows and meadow that are singing so loud, you can't far away they are. Challenging, even if there's a little bit more. Just some more photos of some of these really nice riparian corridors. These are other places where you would get Swainson's thrush. Eagles very common here. Sort of areas with a sort of bigger density. Is really a lot of green-tailed turkeys, a very common bird in that area. So these are really pristine areas, really nice mix of different types of shrubs. And this ranch has done some nice work in kind of rotational grazing, trying to keep these areas pristine. So it's very cool. Similar to just another beautiful, one of our most popular because it's a miserable slog up a really steep slope. But then once you finally reach the top and have shed all of your layers and are sweating like crazy, you get to this spectacular wildflower meadow filled with these irises and just birds everywhere. Back here we are in the pine forest range in the northwest part of Humboldt County. So as I was saying, this is part of this Leonard Creek Ranch. It's just some really gorgeous habitat. One of the favorite places of a lot of Nevada bird count surveyors. And I don't know if people caught this, but this is part of a transect that most NBC surveyors both love and hate. The first part of it is absolutely miserable, to climbing up this super steep slope, and then you get to the top and it's just this gorgeous pristine montane wet meadow. And this is a perfect habitat for white-crowned sparrows, which you see a lot of up there. Fox sparrows, brewer's blackbirds breed up there. So really neat place. We'll listen to a white-crowned sparrow here. There you have it. Moving on. So we're now a little bit south. The range just to the south of the Pine Forest Range is the Black Rock Range, not to be confused with the Black Rock Desert, the home of famous Burning Man. This is it's actually just up to the sort of north and west of that, but a completely different type of place. Really beautiful sagebrush steppe, montane shrubland, also um, canyons and valleys with riparian aspen stands, and it's part of the Lahontan cutthroat trout natural area. Is a place where we've done a lot of surveys in this area, and it's open to the public. A really neat place to go visit. There's a place called Stanley Camp, which is a beautiful campsite, and highly recommended. And at the end, if people have questions about specific places that I've mentioned, or even want to get in touch with me or Ned knows all these places too, to find out more about them, I'm perfectly willing to give out my email address or any other means of communication. So moving on. This is one of the views from the kind of the higher elevations of the Black Rock Range, looking down the Coleman Creek area. Just a gorgeous strip of riparian through these beautiful shrublands, beautiful rock outcroppings. I've had American dippers up in here, amongst lots of other the sort of common birds for this area, Swainson's thrushes, yellow warblers, McGillivrays, stuff like that. But really, really nice area. And of course, they're reintroducing Lahontan cutthroat trout into these areas, and they breed in the streams. This is on the other side of the mountain we just looked at. This creek actually runs down through the Stanley Camp that I mentioned before. And I think the camp comes from, there used to be old Boy Scout, or no, it was some sort of military camps. I can't remember exactly. Ned might have to help me with this later. But yeah, maybe it was Boy Scout camps and military related things. But anyway, this creek is actually going right through a road. So this road goes all the way up to the top. And you can see at this point we were snowed in, or snowed out rather. But this is kind of one of these classic aspen and willow stands in this riparian area. And some of the bird life in there, a poor female yellow warbler feeding a big goofy cowbird chick, and kind of a less than expected bird to find in this area, a black-crowned night heron, which is an interesting find for me. And it flew up from the ground, but maybe they spend more time in there than we know. So again, this is the Black Rock Range in northern Humboldt County. One more, just kind of showing just another really pretty view from the Black Rock Range. This is kind of all the way at the top of one of the areas from the first slide there. Just looking out over, this is, I think, is looking north towards like the Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge. Just a beautiful, very Nevada-esque view of the rolling sagebrush plains. So moving now into Washoe County, where Reno is located. So this is the Virginia Mountains is a nice place to know about, because it's only about an hour from Reno, so it's very accessible. Pretty nice roads that go through there, so you don't necessarily have to have a big four-wheel drive truck or anything to access at least parts of the mountain range. And I've found it to have some of the most spectacular wildflower blooms in the state. And other people may have their favorite wildflower places, but I think that Virginia's is definitely up there. Here's a whole hillside. This was a couple years back. It was after a very wet winter, but I imagine most years are pretty nice either way. Just this whole hillside covered with these mule's ears and lupine and different wildflowers. Really a cool place to check out. You can see our little tiny field truck out there off in the distance. This is often what we do, we drive out to these places on these old 2-track ranching roads and just get as close as possible to whatever transect we have to hike to. And sometimes it ends up being a place like this. And I think we must have already broken our tent down because it's not there. But this is probably where we would have camped the night before our survey and then gotten up at 4 a.m. the next day to hike over this mountain to find wherever we were surveying. So in fact, that's exactly what we did, I remember. But yeah, so that's the life of a field biologist in Nevada. It has its ups and downs, but a lot of good memories of places like this. Also in the Virginias, just another really beautiful wildflower photo. Blue pine, just fields and fields of it. I mean, this particular day was just whole hillsides were just covered in purple. It was a really neat occasion. You can see the kind of sagebrush areas grading up into pinyon juniper. So the Virginias does have a lot of kind of degraded cheatgrass areas, but it's got a lot of really nice habitat too. Definitely worth spending some time and poking around and trying to find the hidden gems. Getting close to the end here. I think this is our last proper mountain range I'm going to talk about. Another one that's really close and accessible from Reno is the Pine Nut Mountains, which is just to the east and south of Reno in Lyon County, and quite easy to access. An hour and a half to get to this area. Oh, maybe more like an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to this area. This is a large valley, the Buckskin Valley on the eastern flank of the Pine Nut Range. But a lot of cool areas are accessible from here. There's a place called Sunrise Pass Road that goes up and over the range from Dayton, I believe, or that general area, little town south of Reno, and then comes over to around Yarrington. So that's worth checking out. There's really nice mix of kind of classic Nevada habitats in the pine nuts, sagebrush steppe, grading up into pinyon juniper, grading up into more big aspen stands, and even getting up into some pretty high elevations in pine forest in the pine nuts. And the pine nuts we're gonna look at a couple more birds here. A good place to see a couple of the really classic Nevada birds, one being the sagebrush sparrow. So in that valley I just mentioned, the Buckskin Valley is a very good place. Sagebrush sparrows are kind of everywhere, but sometimes if you don't know where to look, it can be hard to find them. You have to hit just the right type of sagebrush and height. And so this is a really nice place that's close to Reno to see a lot of sagebrush sparrows. And we're going to listen to their, what I find to be very soothing song. So yeah, kind of another classic sagebrush soundscape with numerous sagebrush sparrows and meadowlarks, raven calling away in the background. So another iconic Nevada bird is the pinyon jay, and they are also a species that is can be easy. I mean, pinyon jays are they're very nomadic, so they're not really easy to find anywhere, but the pine nuts is a great place to go look for and possibly find pinyon jays, and possibly find them in very large numbers. I think that there's a known sort of roving flock of multiple hundreds of birds that I've personally seen, and I know other people. I think that the project that GBO runs that studies pinyon jays has followed this flock around. Um, but I've seen them in the aforementioned Buckskin Valley. So that can be a good place to go look for lots and lots of pinyon jays. One of the neater birds in Nevada. I think I've got a vocalization on here. Yeah. Yeah, there you have it. The classic, unmistakable laughing chatter of the flock of pinyon jays passing over. So I think that was actually this very flock that I recorded. So that's a pretty cool bird. Let's see what we have next. So that's kind of the end of the bird portion here. So I'm just gonna really quick go through a couple slides, sort of talking about what it's like being a surveyor. So this is kind of a good example of what happens in the Nevada bird count. Our boss, I don't know if Jen Ballard is watching this. If you are, hi Jen. But you at the beginning of one of our weeks, she gives us a piece of paper with a bunch of survey locations on it, and sort of points to them on a map and says, "All right, go have fun." And we go find the surveys, and usually we find ourselves in places like this where we're miles and miles and miles from anything. We drive down to the end of a really sketchy road just to be able to get to within a 2 kilometer hike of our plot. And the only place to throw down our tent is a a not very flat piece of rocky ground, but it's hard to complain when you're in such a beautiful place as this. So here's a couple of Nevada bird count bloopers. There's the famous Jen Ballard right there. This one happened a couple years back. I mentioned one of Ned and my colleagues, Mark Dorriesfield, our favorite Canadian. He got himself in a little pickle out here in the Black Rock Range. Hit a little bit of a sandy spot on the road and just slid into oblivion. And luckily, nothing worse than this happened. But we had to spend a couple nights out here waiting for a tow truck to come, and this was quite a debacle. But the car got out, everybody survived, and it's made for a fun story. But and this one was an even crazier blooper coming up next. This one I was personally involved in, and it's long enough past that the embarrassment has ceased to be there. But this was it took us a long time to live this one down, my field partner and I. You might wonder why in the world we would have driven into this, but actually the way it happened was that our 2 other field surveyors drove through this, but they didn't tell us how they drove through it. Somehow they managed to smash through this part and bounce up and down through this mud and get out of it. But there was no cell phone service, so we didn't receive their warning text messages telling us to never ever go through this. So we followed them and drove right into a giant mud hole, and this ended up being a month plus debacle where this car, we couldn't do anything. Like it was a spring that was seeping water into this mud hole, and the only thing we could do is wait for it to dry and hope that we could pull the car out. Here's another view. You can see how bad it got, how deep it was, and miraculously, long story short, after many visits to this place and cinder blocks and all sorts of different implements to get cars out of bad situations, we were finally able to pull this car out with the help of 2 vehicles pulling and a lot of smart thinking by some smart field biologists to get this thing out of here. And it still ran perfectly fine. We took it to the car wash, and it was good as new. So Ford F-150, recommend them. That's pretty much it. So come explore Nevada, where you're at least likely to see rock wrens, one of the more common birds. And yeah, I think with the technical difficulties, I think we've probably gone over a little bit. So I'll send it back to Ned if anybody has any questions. I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. That was great. That really brought back some fun memories, and those soundscapes really transport you. It's a great feeling to just hear those sounds of those aspen stands and feel like I'm there. But we didn't have too many questions.
Absolutely.
I don't know if folks were abstaining from typing while they were watching, if if anyone has any questions. But we did have one question about a specific location that I'm actually not familiar with. I don't know if you would be, Bobby, but this is called Soda Springs in Mineral County near Mina. And Nicholas Carl was wondering about that, and that's something I'm not familiar with. Have you come across that in your surveys?
I haven't. No, that area is not a place I'm super familiar with. I haven't really spent a lot of time in that area.
So we're gonna have to suggest you continue your research, Nick, and let us know, because that sounds like a cool spot.
Yeah.
Some red
near Mina, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, that part of the state is not well known to me, unfortunately.
No, it brings up a good point for me, though, about doing your own research on finding out where to go, because nowadays more and more people are getting out to these wild places, and it's incredibly important to know how to handle yourself out there. And when you do your own research and look up places, you learn a lot of that stuff. So while both Bobby and I have said we're happy to provide info on some of the spots we've mentioned, it's also important to do your own research. But we've got another couple questions popping up here. Eleanor Osgood is wondering about some of the altitudes of some of these mountain ranges we've talked about. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Bobby.
Yeah, so most of them are not super high altitudes. I mean, I think that the highest place would have been the Ruby Mountains, which is probably getting up in the 10, 11 range. But most of the locations I was talking about, like the Black Rock Range, for instance, Pine Forest, the Santa Rosas. I mean, those are mostly maybe 7,500, 8,000. Occasionally, if you're going all the way to the top, you're getting up into the 9,000, 9,500 range. But most of those ranges are kind of in at least these accessible areas that I was showing photos of are kind of in the 7,500 to 8,500 range, and maybe even a little bit lower sometimes more in like 6,500. So not super high.
And she was following with questions about accessibility in late March. And I'll go ahead and say that it's probably best to wait a little bit longer than late March, but it's, again, incredibly altitude dependent. The higher you go, the later you want to wait to go. Some of these valleys are perfectly accessible in late March, but some of these higher places won't thaw out until July. For like Onion Valley Reservoir and the Black Rock Range that we were talking about, that's not doable until June anyway. But it
agreed. Yeah,
depends specifically where you're going. So we've got several more questions rolling in. Let's see. A couple questions about rattlesnakes on the road while we're surveying, and I know I for sure see a ton, and I'm sure you do as well, Bobby.
Yeah, I think Ned probably gets more than I do because he's more tuned into the herps than I am. But yeah, I've seen quite a few rattlesnakes. Not so many on the road. I think I personally tend to run into them more just hiking through the sagebrush, which can put the fear of God in you. But yeah, occasionally on the road for sure, and we try to get out and shoo them off the road, obviously, and occasionally dead on the road. But I wouldn't say frequently. I wouldn't say like I run into them so often that I think it's like roadkill is a serious issue, but it may very well be. I don't know. I'm not a snake biologist, but.
Yep, there are a lot of rattlesnakes out there, and they definitely like to bask on the roads and hide in the shrubs. So definitely always keeping your eyes out when you're looking for those wildflowers.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and which one was the Fang Ridge slide, Bobby? Was that where you were playing black-throated sparrows and larks?
It was, yeah.
Okay. So Judith, that was black-throated sparrow singing at Fang Ridge. And Judith also wonders about best time to look for sagebrush sparrows in Lyon County.
Let's see. I mean, I would think like late April, early May is probably a good time to go out there, like that spot that I was mentioning in the pine nuts when they would be singing out there. Or I mean, all throughout May for sure, and even into June. But that's when they would be starting. I would think late April, early May, maybe mid-April. But we're usually for the NBC at least, we're usually starting to get out there by late April, early May, and they're usually pretty vocal at that point.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good answer there. Wondering about, real quickly, Granite Peak, that was in the Santa Rosas in Humboldt County, Rosie.
Yep.
Wondering about, let's see, atlases and maps that we use. I use the DeLorme Gazetteer. I think that's a great map of Nevada that has a ton of roads and it has land ownership, it has trails. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Bobby.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. That's the one we use for the Nevada bird count. Yeah, I think it's really good. Definitely.
Great. And I think that the only other question I've got is a much more involved question that we just simply don't have time to cover here and do justice. Refer Linda Hiller to some of our other previous presentations about changes in species numbers over time and individual bird count numbers, because these are things that are just so specific and different from place to place that it would just be impossible to give you a respectable answer to that question here. So that's all the questions that I've got. And yeah, that looks good. All right, well,
All right.
If no one has anything else, well, thanks again, Bobby. That was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks everybody who attended. Sorry for the technical difficulties. You can blame it on the Howard Johnson Hotel in Yuma. But
it was definitely worth going back for. Those were some great slides. The Black Rock is one of my truly favorite places in the state, so I'm very glad you got to go back and cover that.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if folks have a way to communicate with Ned and he can pass on my email, or I'd be happy to answer more questions about some of these places because I love to get people out into the sort of the outer reaches of Nevada. So, yeah.
Absolutely. We've got contact info on our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, on our website. You can find us there. And again, this will be recorded and processed and put up on YouTube for anyone who was not able to come tonight. So thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
Good night.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everybody.